for those that we talked to yesterday know my background in organizing and social movements and so forth. And I want to say a little bit about how I'm thinking about this stuff. For me, it starts with leadership, with the question of leadership. Now, perhaps social entrepreneurship is a form of leadership. I learned a different form of leadership, which was about organizing. But I want to back up for a minute and say something about leadership itself, because it's certainly been my experience that as many people talk about leadership, you get different definitions of what it is. My understanding is rooted in 3 questions posed by a first century Jerusalem scholar, Rabbi Hillel, who, when asked, how do I think about what I'm to do in the world? He responded with 3 questions. And the first question, he said, ask yourself, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? Which is not a selfish question. It's a self-regarding question. It's sort of saying, if you presume to lead, to initiate, to take responsibility for others, you better be kind of clear about what you're about. What are your values? What do you bring to it? What's in it for you? What are your resources? What's going on there? But the second question he says to ask yourself is, if I am for myself alone, what am I? Because to be a who and not a what is to recognize that we exist in relationship with others in the world, and that our capacity to realize our objectives is wrapped up with the capacity of others to realize theirs. Final question he says to ask yourself is, if not now, when? Which I don't think is advice to jump off a bridge, but it is, I think it suggests that often we can't learn how to do well what we set out to do without beginning to do it. In other words, that understanding flows from action, it doesn't precede action. Otherwise, we get stuck in what Jane Addams called the snare of preparation. And I don't think that's an issue with this group. Now, for me, leadership's about the interaction of those 3, about the relationship of self to other to action, and how they interact with each other. It's also very important that these are questions and not answers that he responds with, because if you think about what the domain of any form of leadership is it when everything's working? Is it when everything's fine? Is it? No problems? Isn't it when there's problems? Isn't it contradictions, dilemmas, shortcomings? That's when people say, we need some leadership around here, right? So it suggests that the domain of leadership is not when everything is working. It's in fact when things are highly uncertain, not working. So the domain is one of uncertainty, not one of certainty. So which suggests that leadership's a lot less about control than it is about something else. Much less about knowing than it may be about learning. Because we're dealing with the unexpected, the uncertain, and that's scary. You know, it's a challenge to do I have the skills I need to deal with this new circumstance? A challenge to the hands. Can I use resources I have in new ways to meet this challenge, strategic challenge to the head? And where do I get the courage? Where do I get the hope? How can I inspire others with the faith they need to confront these challenges and take the risks required? And that's a challenge to the heart. So for me, leadership's about all 3 of those dimensions. And the definition that I've come to use then is that it's about accepting responsibility for enabling others. So it's not a diva idea of leadership. It's not like I'm the great genius and anybody gets close to me gets a little bit of my genius, it rubs off. But that I'm engaged in a form of social interaction with other people. And what the social interaction is about is shared purpose, achieving shared purpose. And it's under conditions of uncertainty, inherently under conditions of uncertainty. So as I say, that suggests leadership being more about learning than about knowing, more about understanding how do I go forward and learn within this context of uncertainty what's required, then how do I go to school and get all the answers so that then I'll have all the answers when every problem comes my way. It just doesn't work like that. And what this suggests to me is that it's not about person or position, but practice, or a set of practices. And that leadership can become a set of practices. It can be learned, can be taught, can be developed. And this whole idea that leaders come out of the womb leaders is nonsense. But that is, in fact, a set of practices that we can learn and teach others and develop others. if the capacity to enable others to achieve shared purpose under uncertain conditions is something that needs to be widely distributed, then it means a lot of people have to learn how to do this. Now, organizing, which is the kind of leadership that I grew up in, is a particular form of leadership that really begins by asking, who are my people? Who is the community? Who are the people with whom I am engaging? And then what is the problem from their perspective, their point of view, their experience? And then, and critically, how can I work with them so they can use their resources in new ways to solve the problem? In other words, it's not about providing services to clients. And you know, client comes from the Latin inclinare, to depend upon. That's what clients depend upon you. It's not about marketing a product to customers, which is basically an exchange kind of encounter. It's about looking at people as having the potential to become a constituency. I know that's a formal term in terms of electoral politics, but the word comes from the Latin, and the word is constare, which means to stand together. In other words, to enable a community to come together, stand together, decide together, act together in order to solve shared problems that they face. Now that's the organizing perspective. You know, if we waited until we had a volunteer army organized out there to begin a campaign, you never begin. The action itself builds the resources in the course of it. And it's not intended to last forever. It's intended to move from one place to another. It's not intended to be sustained in that sense. It has to be resourced, but the goal is to create conditions that didn't exist before. And so that stream of activity, that process of change, the work to create change, is different than what kind of institutions are going to be created at the other end that are new and that can sustain whatever change we accomplish. Does this make sense? Are you with me? So we're talking about a very dynamic kind of process that hopefully, if we're successful, we don't want to sustain. Who wants to have a civil rights movement forever? That's not the point. The point is to achieve changes that can be sustained. And I think we sometimes get confused between those two about which one we're actually trying to do, and how we resource them, I think, is fundamentally different in terms of how we think about it. I wait to do my big campaign to create change until I got a grant, right? Really? And then the grant runs out, and my effort at change is over. I don't know, not too persuasive. Not too persuasive. Really important to think about that.